So we've got these four very, very interesting papers. Alecsi is going to talk us about the Korean wave, and I think this is going to kind of think about some interesting questions around masculinity and images of Asian men, essentially. Chloe's going to do a presentation which is kind of looking at her fine art practice, which she's kind of titled The Pursuit of Self, and I know that Chloe's practice kind of takes its place across a range of very interesting media, from video, performance, poetry, and many other things besides. Molly is going to talk to us about anthropomorphism in animated movies, and, if you like, the ways that this is also something that kind of is used to deal with questions around various identities. So how does that sort of factor in? And Petronella is going to be talking about representations of the Maasai culture in kind of Western fashion primarily, I think. So a very interesting sort of set of interconnected sort of things. Basically, the format is we're going to do the four presentations. You've each basically got 15 minutes, and I'll kind of give you a big sort of hand signal about 2 minutes before the end of your paper, so that you know that your kind of allotted time is coming towards an end. And then at the end, we'll have a chance for the audience to ask you some questions and perhaps have a conversation about some of the things that have come up and some of the links between them. So we'll go through in the order that we've got them on our sheet here. I think the first person on my list is Alecsi. Are you kind of ready to kick us off, Alecsi?
Yeah, I have a question. If I reach 15 minutes, does that mean I just have to skip the whole thing? And for example, I haven't finished yet. Do I just skip to the end and like?
I think we can kind of give you a couple of minutes leeway, but obviously we've got a kind of a restricted time. So if we kind of get to sort of 15 minutes and you go, oh gosh, I've only halfway through, then kind of think about what it is that you might need to sort of edit down and kind of maybe take us towards the end, and just kind of see if you can sort of summarize stuff before then.
Well, okay.
It's one of the difficult things, I think, in giving a sort of an academic type presentation is kind of sticking to that time. But do your best. We'll give you a kind of couple of minutes leeway, but see how you do. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Well, I'm just going to share my screen. Yeah, you can just let me know if you guys are able to see my screen.
Yeah.
Okay, so everyone, my name is Alecsi, and today I will be discussing a summary of my dissertation titled The Evolution of East Asian Stereotypes depicted through the Western lens, as well as raising the question of how the Korean wave has transformed the marginalization and stereotyping of East Asian men in particular portrayed in Western media. So to thoroughly understand how the Korean wave has challenged the Western standards of male gender behaviors and characteristics, there must be an initial analysis of the world-renowned primary hub, the film industry, Hollywood. So over the years, Hollywood has had a reputation of perpetuating gender stereotypes, normalizing gender inequality, but by adhering to the conventional gender system that is culturally rooted in society. As masculinity and femininity are traditionally viewed as extreme opposites, meaning that depending on the gender assigned at birth, one must possess either masculine or feminine traits, implying the absence of the other. So one example of gender stereotyping would be leading men in films having to portray a male character with hypermasculinity traits. And this has become a significant factor as to why issues surrounding toxic masculinity, as well as the objectification of women, exist in today's society. And if you look at Laura Mulvey's theory on the male gaze, it explains how the media controls the way women are portrayed from a heterosexual male perspective. Therefore, it relegates them to be status of objects. So hypermasculinity in Hollywood films. So going back to male gender stereotypes, hypermasculinity became a foreground for Hollywood films. And in the 1980s, if you look at both films on the screen, I've looked at Rambo and The Terminator. Both films embody the ideal form of physical masculine traits, which emphasize a muscular physique, muscular physique showcasing like strength, power, assertiveness, and aggressiveness, suggesting a normalization of violence amongst men. Of course, these characters were not representative of every man in the 1980s, but portrayal of hypermasculinity does create an unrealistic standard of the ideal masculine construct. So moving on, I want to discuss the stereotypes and misrepresentation of Asian men and how typecasting of Asian actors are still prevalent And growing up, I always watched Hollywood films, and I noticed that there's like a one-dimensional characterization of ethnic minorities. And with that being said, Asians are the least represented minority in the media by a large margin. And if you look at the screen, a recent study gives a racial breakdown of some characters in film. And as you can see here, only a very small percentage of Asian characters are being casted in comparison to other races. But why is that though? Well, this dates back to America's history of racial segregation, where casting roles, especially for minorities, were uncommon, and therefore it was highly unlikely that actors of color would be cast for a starring role in a mainstream film produced by Hollywood. So instead, the entertainment industry utilized an alternative method of yellowface to portray the roles of minorities such as Asians. This was a commonly used practice in which a movie character who is portraying a role of an Asian character is being played by a Caucasian actor, with the use of makeup and prosthetics in attempt to kind of create the Asian features such as the monolid eye and imitating the yellow olive skin tone to resemble physical Asian attributes. Not only that, but media representation of Asian men as described by Kong were also predominantly emasculated, feminized or passive due to the history of Chinese men arriving in the US in the mid 1800s, and they're being forced into jobs typically associated with women, such as housekeeping, cooking, and this kind of exacerbates the effeminate image of Asian characters in which are being portrayed in Hollywood films, but with the very like negative connotations towards effeminacy. I guess that's because it contradicts the Western idealized form of masculinity, in which hegemonic masculinity is deemed as a dominant form of masculinity. And yeah, so undesired image of Asian men. Because of Western society's views on Asian men, strongly influenced by the one-dimensional characterization formed by Western media, this has created an undesired image of Asian men, and where being casted to be the romantic lead in movies became a rare occurrence. This impacts the way Asian men are typically viewed in Western culture. According to research on Asian American men in romantic dating markets, Asian American men in particular are socially excluded from romantic relationships. In fact, we find that despite the higher education and income of Asian American men, there is evidence that they are systematically excluded from having romantic relationships during adolescence and young adulthood. The popular images of Asian American men as geeky and undesirable as potential mates are consistent with work on racial preferences among daters. Although there could be various reasons as to why Asian Americans are the least desirable in comparison to other ethnic groups, such as an individual's race, racial or cultural preferences, because everyone has them. Hollywood's stereotypical portrayal of East Asian characters enforces the idea that East Asian men are undesirable and effeminate, placing them at a disadvantage when it comes to dating. The roles often given to Asian men are based upon the given stereotypes. it strips them of their masculinity, often labeled as effeminate and painted as nerds. They are deemed undesirable as they're either kung fu masters and killers with an exaggerated accent and mannerisms. So these are racial microaggressions from the media-driven culture of the United States, contributing to the normalization of stereotypes and underrepresentation of marginalized groups. This makes it complicit in creating an environment that tolerates casual racism. So films such as Breakfast at Tiffany's and The Mask of Fu Manchu are examples of two different impersonations of Western perceptions of what being Oriental is. This includes the exaggerated racial features by focusing on the physical appearance of each character. So if you look at an image here, it shows the character of Mr. Yunioshi from Breakfast in Tiffany's, and this is played by Mickey Rooney, a non-Asian actor. And not only is this an example of yellowface, it's performed for the pleasure of the non-Asian viewer. The character is inept, buck-toothed, puffy-cheeked, and sexually depraved. And another image shows Boris Karloff, an English actor playing the role of Fu Manchu, who is portrayed to be a villainous Chinese mastermind. So his role is a very iconic performance of yellowface. And in order to emphasize his look, he was known for his hatred of white people. So makeup was used to accentuate his wickedness. It just shows like how much attention to detail was considered to make him more appear more Oriental rather than just hiring an actor who best fits the role, an Asian man. However, like there is another reason why Hollywood refused to cast Asian actors, and that was due to the Hays Code in Hollywood being implemented. It banned interracial dating, or it censored any form of intimacy involving interracial couples on screen. So as these stereotypes of Asian men challenges the image of Asian masculinity, the pre-existing notions of masculinity have variances based on cultural factors. For example, in Western culture, as I had mentioned earlier, masculinity is defined by characteristics of physical strength and emotional restriction. However, the same characteristics do not necessarily align with the cultural definition of masculinity of when you're looking at Eastern culture, specifically South Korea, in which I'll be talking about. Okay. So soft masculinity practices in South Korea. As part of my research, I analysed the worldwide phenomenon of South Korean pop culture, otherwise known as the Korean wave, which emerged globally in the late 1990s. The South Korean entertainment industry encourages a versatile image of masculinity portrayed by actors through movies or dramas and gender performativity of K-pop male idols. So I looked at Son Jung, who is a pioneer in early Korean gender studies, and he had developed a theory of transcultural masculinity, and as well as using Connell's argument that different cultures and different periods of history construct masculinity differently. Masculinities do not exist prior to social behavior, either as bodily states or fixed personalities. So in short, the concept of masculinity can be dynamic, as various cases such as cultural and social influence would need to be considered to define masculinity, thus supporting the concept of dynamic masculinity that is prevalent in Korean culture. The image shown here indicates the results from her site insights. So it's a study of cultural differences conveyed both verbally and non-verbally. So this chart kind of just shows the country comparison between South Korea and the United States, and I focused on masculinity. So as you can see, USA kind of scored quite high with 62, and South Korea, on the other hand, was significantly less at 39. So this kind of reinforces the stance that what defines the characteristics of masculinity in terms of type and role is rooted and developed by culture, which indicates that the cause of variation is stemmed from differences in cultural backgrounds between the West and the East. Male K-pop idols, such as BTS, whom I've used as my case study, have a significant effect on the male grooming industry in South Korea, as the image of a metrosexual male or flower boy is imposing a softer masculinity entered mainstream media. As South Korea imposes high beauty standards, having flawless face and keeping yourself looking youthful is considered attractive and plays an important role in success. This means that, considering the idol's appearances, such as their visual aesthetics, is like a very essential part in marketing their image to the public. So, for example, the aesthetic and image of each member from a member from the popular K-pop boy group called BTS is produced by the agency depending on the concept they want each member to portray. So I've looked at one member called Jimin. These are images of him from the group's official Instagram account, and which is managed by the agency. So one of the image displays the androgynous persona of Jimin. It shows a close-up of the idol wearing light and natural makeup, such as the eyeshadow and red tinted full lips, enhancing its soft feminine features. So this whole, both these images kind of just, it helps normalizing male grooming. Unlike in Western culture, notions of toxic masculinity still exist. Therefore, it prevents men to confidently consume cosmetic products. So gender performativity. So in similar context, the image of soft masculinity is not only expressed through fashion and makeup, but it's expressed through gender performance of the idols. For example, looking at male K-pop idols, everything they do on stage has to do with gender performativity as a form of fan service. So fan service is a deliberate performance which can be performed in different ways to gratify the wishes of fans, and it keeps them entertained. They're expected to display such characteristics that defies the concept of toxic masculinity, such as being sensitive, emotional, empathetic, or innocent. And there's another way of performing this fan service, and it's by skinship. It's the act of skinship derived from Japanese culture, represents maternal bonding between a mother and child. It has been adapted in K-pop as a part of fan service. So whereas it's used in a platonic context, referring to physical intimacy between two friends, but with no romantic or sexual attraction involved. So the transnational appeal of Korean dramas. So according to Kim, the CEO of Drama Fever, it revealed that 72% of its users were non-Asians. This shows that it has seemingly become appealing for non-Asian viewers, despite the language barrier and the cultural difference. So according to Lee, the diversity of masculinity portrayed through their screens induces a racialized romantic desire for East Asian men, especially romantic dramas or melodramas. It makes viewers imagine and fantasize about Korea to the point that they travel to Korea to engage in intimate relationships with Korean men. She describes these dramas as negligible fantasies devoid of realistic value. This is because some viewers may display behaviors of exoticizing Korean culture. So, and that creates an expectation of the characteristics and behavior of Korean men that reflect the roles of men from dramas. And oftentimes they are unable to differentiate reality from fantasy. So as Bennett states, before K-pop exploded in the US, Asian men struggled to be noticed by the opposite sex. Women proved it wrong by admitting in surveys that they were least attracted to Asian men or other races. That's changing as young fans discover the aesthetic of polished idols. So in conclusion, to conclude this presentation, the rising popularity of Korean culture and entertainment have influenced other traditional views of masculinity to be more aligned with an all-exclusive standard of masculinity. Evidently, masculinity is not oriented around a single definition composed by a specific throng of people, but a multifaceted perspective from numerous individuals of different cultures and backgrounds. Ultimately, past harmful stereotypes of East Asian men being depicted as effeminate and undesirable are gradually fading as this reconstructed version of masculinity influenced by the appeal of South Korean entertainment are becoming normalized and accepted in Western media. So as a result, the stereotypes and marginalization that Western media and society initially associated East Asian men with have been positively transformed. And yeah, that's it.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Virtual round of applause. Well done. So yeah, that was really interesting. We should, and also well done for fitting it into the 20 minutes.
I was like getting so nervous. Thank you.
So next on my list is Chloe. Chloe, are you ready to talk to us a bit about your work?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Good.
Great. Hold on. Bear with me one moment. Okay, great. I'm gonna do it like, okay, I'm just gonna do it like this and I'll just click the page. Can everyone see? Yeah, oh, yeah, it worked. Jeez. So we're gonna start off with a meditation and take things down. So I believe there's in a process of letting things go and there's power when you release things. So we're gonna do this by doing some breathing exercises. So for 4 seconds, inhale everything you need to let go of, whether that's people, situations, grudges, and then I want you to release it by breathing out for 8 seconds. Next, inhale all of your inhibitions, any negative thoughts that are holding you back, and then I want you to exhale and let it all go. And then inhale everything that you're thankful for. It could be little minor things like the fact that you're healthy, that you're breathing. And then I want you to release it. And lastly, inhale all of you. Just hold yourself and then release your power into the universe. So I done this mainly because I want you to release and let go of who you were so you can find out who you are. And that is why I looked at self-discovery this year. So one of my favorite quotes is, it's being covered right now, but a poet is the equivalent to a superhero. The only difference is we save people with words. I like to think of my practice or anything that I do. Social media is my gallery space. So I do this on Instagram, on Zoom, I participate in workshops. On Clubhouse, I go into different chat rooms, and on YouTube, I've started my own series, which focuses on paintings. So for that reason, the layout of today's presentation is going to be like a social media account. So profile is where I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. Then the posts and archives are stuff that I've been working on, like pieces from me and pieces of work. And then insights is more of an insight into what I'm doing now and an insight into what the future holds for me. So what I do is art and poetry. So it's a combined practice. I do a lot of things where it's video as well, videos included into it, photography is included into it, but the primary focus is on spoken word and visual art. They are both distinct. Oops, oh, that was my alarm. They are both distinct, but they are very much connected to each other and they mediate each other. I have multi-personalities in my work. So because I do so many different things, I might have a YouTube Chloe, which is really fun and bubbly and loud. And then I have the spoken word, which is very like, just very casual, very relaxed and very intellectual. And the visual art Chloe, which is very creative. I like to think of my practice as a whole, but I am a very big part of that practice. This year, I wanted to reinvent myself and think of myself in ways that I have never done before. I really do have a passion for people, and it translates into the things that I draw, because I always draw portraits. And the people that I meet when I go to shows, I realized that being yourself can be difficult. So this is why I decided to discover self-discovery. I started off the year by looking at my own series, which is called Out of This World. It's a combination of oil paintings and acrylic paintings. So I wanted to think of an alternative reality. I realized that with this COVID context, sometimes you feel like you wasn't in the world anymore. It's just this completely different world. I looked at vanitas, and for me, in my paintings, vanitas is the reminder that death is always close by. So in lots of the paintings, I would draw bubbles, and bubbles are just objects. They don't last long, they don't live long, and they're always susceptible to being burst. And for me, I always wanted to be inside my own bubble, in my own comfort zone. But because the government told you need to stay in your bubbles, it kind of felt uncomfortable to me. And why are we staying in our bubbles when there's a whole world outside of it? So moving on to my performance. So the second part of me is spoken word poetry. I do performances across the UK and virtually in the USA. I like to think of my poems as pieces instead of poems. They are just different pieces of me that I bring into the world. One of my most memorable performances this year was in March, where for Women's Day, I participated in an event with Million Women Rise, then organization, a global organization and the activism is around ending violence against women and girls. I teamed up with a poetry group called Safe Spoken, which is just like 6 poets, including me, and we do poetry for women. So the poem that I performed was called Black Girl Magic. This is probably my hardest poem ever because it's very, very deep. So the concept was magic, and Black Girl Magic is a hashtag that is used to uplift Black women online. So as soon as I say I'm going to perform a poem called Black Girl Magic, everyone's like, yay. But the deeper connotation behind it is magic, highlighting disappearance. So I would link Black Girl Magic as the theme, but it was deeper than just being a hashtag. It was to highlight all the women that disappear in the world. So throughout the day, we spoke about mothers, we spoke about girls, we spoke about women that are in abusive relationships, we spoke about women that have changed genders and stuff like that, but no one ever speaks about the missing women. So Black Girl Magic was the poem that was speaking for them. One of the ladies actually said to me after I performed it, she said, what was missing is the missing. So that poem for her filled that missing piece. Throughout the year as well, I looked at Anna Mendieta and how with her artwork, she leaves traces of herself, and also just using poetry, being able to speak things into existence. After writing a heavy piece like that, I felt really low. So I decided to write something for myself. I had a conversation with my friend and he's like, why don't you write a poetry piece that's for you? And I was like, I always write poems that's for me. And he's like, no, but write something that you need to hear, because sometimes you like hearing your calling. You make more physical calls than spiritual calls, then wonder why you don't have any answers. You know, it's so dangerous not knowing who you are. What's scarier than that is letting other people set the bar. See, they can give you opinions, but don't let them take it too far. You got to have drive before you even get the car, can't afford to have no focus. Get to the point where you chose it, control it, your mind, console it, the things you need to hear, you know it. And you have potential, so show it. So sometimes I just dip in and out of poetry whenever I need to hear something. And I wanted to be more vulnerable and more open in my work. Because I write in metaphors, it's easy for me to hide parts of myself. So being vulnerable is a very big challenge for me. And just being able to be vulnerable through nakedness, and not explicit nakedness, but naked in how I feel and what I write about. So I looked at stripping. My favorite poet is a guy called Rudy Francisco, and he had this poem called Strippers. And basically the poem is about how he met a stripper, and she wanted to hide that part of her life. And when she kind of revealed that she was a stripper, she thought that he would never ever be able to understand her. But he then linked being a spoken word artist to stripping, because we stand on stage and we strip parts of ourselves to people that we've never met before. And that is what it means to be an artist. You have to reveal parts of yourself, and people will come and look, and yeah, it's just like you're stripping. So I looked at a global organization called Femen, who do activism and protest naked. What was interesting in my dissertation is that when I done my research, one of the women, her name's called Oskana, she ended up killing herself, committing suicide. And when she died, she left a note that said, "I came, I stripped, I won." So it kind of really did tie in really well with my essay being stripping and vulnerability and the layout of it. And Bernie Sill, she does naked portraits, but it conveys raw emotion through her body. And Anna Mendieta, I already told you, she has an absent body through her work. One of my favorite quotes from Rudy Francisco is a poem called Museum, very short. And it goes, "Your pain becomes an exhibit, a place for people to walk through and then leave when they are ready. No one ever asks a museum if it's okay."
Oma.
This leads me, have I run over? Oh, okay, no. This leads me on to my exhibition that I done at the nunnery. I showed my braids, my body. This was a Polaroid, a collage. It was a response to the laws that were trying to ban long hair treatments, which would affect Afro hairstyles. I realized that oppressive structures work to marginalize Black women, and the piece embodies Black art and Black modernism to show how identity is attempted to be taken from us. This is the reason why this is for Black women and their identity. And this is the repossession of Black women and their identity. I also looked at rhythm and flow and dance, and through the images, I speak a different language using movement. The second piece was Pieces from Me, which is, I just grabbed my most memorable and most significant lines from poems, and I put them all together. So different pieces created different pieces of me. So I believe that there is power in speaking things into existence. I hate that I can speak fluently in a language I should not know. You go from scrape knees to scrape egos. The caged bird still tweets. There's only one man I've chased, and his name is called the Ice Cream Man. Despite our differences, our memories are the same. I wish I could read the survivor's guide written for myself. A lot of us don't need more followers, we need more help. Don't ever quit. Each breath is your medicine. Take it. And those were just my most memorable lines from 10 different poems. And I would just put it all together just to make myself feel whole. Later on, towards the end of the year, I started working on my own series, which is called the Identity Repossession series. This piece is called Period. And it looks at themes of personal reflection, womanhood, culture, and race. I was just able to repossess my own body. And as Black women, our body is constantly an object of experimentation in scientific research, historically and still now. I use negative and positive space. And in a way, these images kind of resemble a test tube and a lab. I actually took the images in the studio, and the studio is all white walls, so it reminds me of a 2 minute scientific lab. And And the whole point of period was I'm telling you who I am rather than allowing medical research to tell me who I am. I don't think we have time for the video, but this was the poem that goes along with the video. I am my menstrual cycle. I am up, I am down, I am consistent, I am inconsistent. A lot of people don't like me, but I am needed and necessary. I won't always be here, but you will notice when I am and when I'm not, when I'm on and when I'm off. So the future is bright. Post-graduation, I'm planning to travel, publish my own book, and just constantly put myself out there. Upcoming shows, I had a show on Sunday, which was in Market Peckham, which is a brand new cafe, but it's also a media place. So they have galleries. They recently launched a magazine, and it's really sick. So that's Market Peckham. It's called Coffees and Cocktails. And my upcoming show is August 30th, where I'm going to do a headline show in Bethnal Green. Tickets are still out, but they're definitely going to sell out soon. And then there is no endpoint for me. Life is something to be played, paused, and to be continued. Thank you.
Oh yeah, nice one. Thank you very much, Claire. That was really enjoyable presentation. I can see Alberto's giving you a big thumbs up too. Next on my list is Molly. Are you there, Molly? Yes.
Yep, I'm here. Hold on, let me turn my camera on one sec. Hi.
Oh, hi, Molly. Are
Sorry,
you
I've got the other screen. It's pretty confusing. There we go. Hi, everyone. I'm ready. Yep. Shall I just start? Okay. Let me just share my screen. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about the topic that I did for my third year dissertation, and it was titled Human Animals, Exploring Anthropomorphism, Symbolism and Representation in Animated Movies. Okay. So anthropomorphism is something that's been really widely researched in so many different areas by so many different scholars over the years. And in this presentation today, I'm going to be discussing how it's been used in cartoon animated movies to help present social issues to a viewer, things like racism, sexism, that kind of thing. The reason I wanted to explore this topic in the first place was I really enjoyed watching cartoon animated movies growing up, which I'm sure many of us have. And I discovered anthropomorphism during my studies at Middlesex and just found the idea that issues can be presented through these lovable characters that we can all relate to. And I just found it interesting and knew I wanted to dive deeper into the topic. So what is anthropomorphism? So anthropomorphism is a literary tradition where we give animals human form, emotions, intentions, movement, that kind of thing, really just making them human-like. And this act of anthropomorphism stems all the way back to ancient Greece in the 6th century BC. And this is with the well-known Aesop's fables, which I'm sure you all have heard of, like, you know, the tortoise and the hare, that kind of thing. And that was really to help teach children lessons for adulthood, prepare them for life. And then it's continued being used within literature with things like Tales of Peter Rabbit, and then into cartoons with like famous Mickey Mouse, that kind of thing, right up until the present day. So the use of anthropomorphism, Caroline Burke and Joby Copenhaver discussed the theory that anthropomorphism provides this separation between the viewer and the topic related, just allowing them to kind of look at it from a different angle. And then Paul Wells equally discusses this separation and said that if it doesn't exist, the likelihood of them understanding the message that's trying to be shown really decreases. And this is because it just becomes way too close to actual reality and doesn't allow people to prompt a different way of thinking and understanding what's being shown. And this isn't only limited to adults either. It allows younger children to be exposed to a topic at a much younger age because it's a lot lighter hearted approach to something rather than something that would be in a live action movie is a lot more dark than in a kid's movie. And this means that they can form and relate to and create a connection and understanding with the character. So meanings within film, there are 4 of them, but I'm only going to be discussing 2 for the purpose of this presentation. So explicit meaning, this is kind of the idea and moral of the movie, really what the writers and the directors are trying to put forward. Like within things like Inside Out, it's kind of like you need happiness and sadness equally, so you can experience one and the other. That's kind of the main point of the film. And then the implicit meaning is the abstract meaning behind the film. And this is usually based upon a person's life experiences, their opinions, just how they view things. So really depends and varies person to person. So for my dissertation, I looked at 3 different case studies. I looked at Happy Feet, the Bee Movie, and Zootopia. But for this presentation, I'm just going to be focusing on Happy Feet and Zootopia. So when looking at the level of anthropomorphism, Happy Feet presents a really low level of anthropomorphism. Besides the singing, the talking, and the emotions that they feel being human-like, they're very much still penguins, and penguins that are in the Arctic. Their way of life is the same. They still swim in the ocean. You know, they walk like penguins, that kind of thing. Where Zootopia really represents the complete opposite end of the spectrum. They are completely humanized animals. You know, they walk on 2 legs, they wear clothes, they have jobs, you know, they listen to music on the train, just like Judy is here in the picture. And when looking at the level of anthropomorphism within the animated movies, it's equally as important to look at the use of humans as well, as this can have an effect on it. So in Zootopia, there's no representation of humans at all. The animals basically take the role of humans within the narrative, and this just allows them to take that one step closer to really representing our society, whereas including humans would lessen that, as the humans would take the role of the humans instead of the animals and wouldn't allow them to. And in Happy Feet, the use of humans is really minimal. Yet still, I find a really important point of the plot, and it wouldn't be the same without it. And the small use allows the meaning to come through more, something that's important when looking at a representation, which I'll go to in a minute. So addressing social issues, Happy Feet addresses issues such as ableism and environmentalism. So the plot of Mumble being different and an outcast and shunned from his waddle due to the fact that he can't sing and only dance due to the defect that happened during the incubation process in the egg, really links to the representation of disabilities along with the struggles that holds in daily life. And the lack of food source that the penguins experience due to the overfishing by humans in the area tackles environmentalism and the effects that we can have on the planet as the modern world progresses and the demand for food grows. And then within Zootopia, it brings to light 2 quite difficult topics of racism and sexism. We see the way in which Judy is downplayed because she's just a small bunny, as they say in the movie, a small fluffy bunny. She's expected to do something else besides being a police officer, especially by her parents who want her to be safer. And this really relates to women within the workplace. Obviously, women are seen to do more jobs like receptionists, for example, rather than taking more assertive roles like CEOs, which are seen as masculine. Then the use of predator and prey within the movie represents the idea of different races and the disbalance that can happen when false information and fear is spread. And the way that the ethnic minorities can be seen and treated within modern society. We can see here the tiger and the bunny on the train. The bunnies are fearful of this tiger because he's a predator. And obviously the news in the movie was that predators had become dangerous. So comparing the movies, the way in which Happy Feet approaches a topic is way more abstract and allows more of that implicit meaning to come through, drawing from it what you relate to most within the film. And its lack of modern day influence, with them just being penguins, creates an opportunity to embrace the topic a lot easier and understand it because it's a less distracting form of presenting it. And Zootopia's approach is much less abstract, the explicit meaning really being the driving force within the movie and guiding your thoughts and emotions. The connection it has to our society playing an advantage. The distance that anthropomorphism provides that I mentioned earlier takes this usually dark and uncomfortable topic and allows it to be shown, especially to a younger audience at a younger age, and accepted easier by everyone, and hopefully prompting change within a younger generation. The distance that for a topic such as racism is needed because people's egos and stuff like that cloud their judgment when viewing something. So being able to look at it through a similar but yet different approach means they can understand the idea before relating it to real life situations. So feeling for the fact that Nick the fox is being judged on the fact that he's a fox rather than who he is as a person can relate to how a person is viewed based on their skin color rather than who they are as a person, for example. And then having a story stripped back to animals like in Happy Feet doesn't allow the viewer to dismiss things such as ableism because they're made to look at it as a simpler approach, creating less opportunities for dismissal. If Mumble was a school kid in a singing class, well, why not just put him in a dancing class instead? But because he can't leave the waddle or choose where he is, much like we can't choose that we're born into life, we can't make that dismissal. Equally, the story being shown in Happy Feet through the eyes of the animal means we can get a better understanding for the effects that we have from their point of view. We can sympathize and feel for them. Therefore, the likelihood of us wanting to change increases. So in conclusion, depending on the message that's trying to be portrayed, there are combinations that would work more effective than another. The distance that it provides can be utilized to different degrees depending on what issue a person has chosen and how they want it portrayed to a viewer. So really clear consideration is what is needed with each new narrative, as there's no right or wrong way to utilize anthropomorphism. And then moving forward in my personal life, I found researching and analyzing these movies in this way has not only expanded my knowledge of anthropomorphism, but it's really helped me understand the purpose and benefits and advantage of using it within a production. And this doesn't only apply to the use of anthropomorphism either, but it helps me expand upon other areas in my field. So allowing me to have a deeper understanding of how symbolism and things can be represented within digital media and how I can use it to create my work. So making 3D models, even if it's just a simple chair, whether it's a chair from ancient Rome or Asian culture, for example, or in a modern day office of a rich businessman, they would both be shown differently. I want to present things differently depending on the situation. And now I have that knowledge to be able to do that, which I think is really interesting and really helpful. Finally, I'd like to say thank you everyone for listening to my presentation. I hope you learned something and enjoyed it. Hopefully I didn't rush through it. I was trying to keep in the time frame, but yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Molly. Yeah, very, very interesting again. So round of digital applause for you again. And which brings us on to our last paper, Petronella. Are you ready to start us off on your presentation?
Yeah. Okay, great. Should I just go for it?
Yep. Go for it.
Can you see everything? Sorry. Yep.
We
Okay,
can see fine.
So, okay, perfect. Sorry, I think my internet was just acting up for a second, but yeah, I think it should be fine now. So hi everyone, my name is Petronella Cheng, and I'm going to be shortly discussing the ideas around my dissertation, which was titled Necrophilia, a Love Affair Between the West and the Maasai Culture. And I say continue because I'm still, getting more and more research done, and I'm still kind of like elevating my project, which I will kind of refer to more so at the end, but yeah. So I'm originally from Kenya, and that's why I wanted to do this project, but I'm also a third culture kid because I've lived in 7 different countries. So I've always had a very like multi-perspective, multicultural, dimensional view of everything in the world. And this specifically, I guess, happens when in art, and I'm studying fashion communications and styling. And what really enticed me, I guess, to look into research about cultural appropriation with the Maasai is because I had seen it kind of being demonstrated in a Western view. And because I'm personally Maasai, my tribe is Maasai, I felt like I wanted to look back at my own history and gather an analysis from there and see how we could possibly change it as well. So the first thing I looked at was within my dissertation, I really wanted to create a sort of timeline so that it was easier to really understand, or better, maybe better to understand the level of appropriation and why it completely ignores the cultural significance, particularly within the Maasai culture. And I wanted to start off with colonialism in Kenya. And this is because when Kenya was colonized by Britain, the British had a very strong rule, but they also a thing of creating sort of a concentration camps for particular tribes within Kenya. And one of those tribes were the Maasai, who to this day are very still segregated from a lot of the other tribes in Kenya because they were so true to their tribal traditions and their tribal culture and not willing to necessarily lead into cultural assimilation with this sort of new, I guess, this new wave of what the culture should be with, you know, the British rule. And I thought that this was very important because it was a great way to start the presentation, because you really could understand that the fact that they were, you know, fighting for their traditions and more so not fighting for survival, but fighting to sort of have the story and the history of who they are survive to what we see today. And there's not necessarily like an appreciation for that when we see Maasai culture appropriated in fashion today. And so this leads me into the cultural appropriation that we see in the fashion industry today. And the very first example that I wanted to use was Kokontizai. I think I'm pronouncing them wrong, but they're a London-based brand. And I'll more so go into why exactly this is an appropriation, besides the obvious fact of mostly white models wearing Maasai clothing. But I thought this quote by Letitia Dixon was very interesting, which says cultural appropriation is defined as taking things from a culture that is not your own, especially without showing that you understand or respect the culture. And I wanted to use this quote specifically because, in a sense, there is no significance, cultural significance within these clothing. It's more so used for aesthetic pleasing methods, I guess. Yeah. And also we see it in the Louis Vuitton spring summer 2012 collection as well, in which they are wearing the Maasai shuka. And, you know, I thought that this was also a very like interesting example to use because it was more so used as a way of creating something new or innovative within the fashion industry. However, like, I guess also the fact that there is no local ties, there is no ties held to the local tribes or the people who, you know, actually have these things was also very interesting for me to kind of tap into within my dissertation. And then lastly, I wanted to look at a small brand called Romani, sorry about that. And they are a London-based brand, and they were founded, I can't remember what the founder's name is, but she went to Kenya for like an exchange program for a year, and she got a lot of Maasai beads and just started making jewelry out of them, or she would get beads that were already put together and she would just sell them off. And I sort of felt like that was cultural appropriation in a different sense, because it's also not noting the women who created the jewelry. And so now I kind of go into why all of the examples that I've shown are a form of cultural appropriation. So in Maasai tradition, color is very significant because it not only shows who you are, but it also shows where you are from within the Maasai villages. And on the side here, I've just shown what each color means, and also with each color, more so dominant colors such as red and black are mostly worn by men, whereas yellow, orange, blue are more feminine colors, and they will like represent things such as like fertility or generosity, like accommodation, that kind of thing. And just to, once you're done, I'll just give you a moment to look at that. If you can look at some of the examples, like for this one, in an instance, like he's wearing he has a lot of blue in his choker, the Maasai choker, and that is typically worn when you are going to get married, when a man is going to pay for your dowry, and usually you wear as many chokers as the amount of cows that they give you. So that's one form of it. And also the fact that he's wearing blue, which is basically a way of saying that your marriage is going to be blessed because you're getting cows as a dowry, and like the cows need the water and all of that. So yeah, that was just a tie that I wanted to put together. And I also looked at the village of No Men in Kenya, in Samburu, which are also part of the Maasai tribe. And I wanted to look at this as another example to kind of tie into the use of cultural appropriation, just to sort of create a deeper meaning as to the actual labor that mostly women have to go through to create these beautiful pieces. And in the village of No Men, actually, it's very interesting because it's a village with no men, because in Maasai culture, men are very obviously are the dominating ones, but they also dictate whether women will have access to education or not, can be independent or not. And these women were sick and tired of that, and they wanted to create a village where they were able to take care of themselves, make money for themselves, and really sort of thrive on their own. And I wanted to use this first shot as a kind of example, linking back to the earlier picture that I showed with the many chokers that they wear around their necks, for instance, and also what the men wear. So as I said, men will typically wear like a lot of red, a lot of black, sometimes blue, but not very often, because those are dominating colors. So yeah. And I have a little spot that I'm going to play in for just 1 minute.
Let them kill us. When we started this.
Oh, sorry. Oh my gosh.
Let them kill us and make history of killing all of the women in this village. We decided to do small business, selling our jewelry on the road. When tourists are passing, we welcome them and they buy our things when we are here. When we started selling, we found the men beat the women and they take away the money.
Do you think the men felt threatened by
they do.
Women being able to make their own money?
They do.
With the ability to generate income, the women of Umoja have found independence.
So every morning we have to come and display our things. This is what we depend on.
Yeah.
This is our living.
Which one did you make? Really? It's nice. This is amazing. I read that you met Hillary Clinton.
I'm just going to end it there because that was main bit that I wanted to show, but it really goes into sort of the craftsmanship around creating beads specifically. And these beads are used in different ways. So they're in jewelry, but they're also in sandals and bracelets and earrings and stuff like that. And some of them are actually sewn onto pieces of clothing that we call the shuka. And that's what like the women and men use to drape themselves. So yeah. Okay, let's see if I can, yeah. So with this, I continue doing my research to see how we can potentially change cultural appropriation. And I thought that this would be a way for us, or the fashion industry, to be more inclusive and actually honor these people by having them have a place to create these designs. And so I found out that the British Council in Kenya actually has created a sector called Creative DNA, and they collaborate with Kenyan creatives on their work, and they give them about £6,000 to create a collection, some visuals, and that is a way for them to expand their markets and also lead to more global collaboration, which I thought was very interesting. And this is some of the work that they've done. They were able to create a sort of digital magazine with Fashion Scout called Wow Zine. And I thought that this was definitely a good step, but I felt like a lot more could definitely be done. And so that went on to my final project for this year, which was creating a digital platform, a digital communications platform for Kenyan creatives around the world to collaborate and connect with each other. And it's called Kenya Created. So I'm just going to click on the link here and you can see. So this is my website, Kenya Created, and it really just goes on to the creatives that I have connected with and worked with all over the world. So some are here in the UK, some are in the US, and some are in Kenya. And I really did this because I felt like the way out of cultural appropriation is by recognizing more Kenyan creatives and having them and having a place for them to really thrive in their work. So I'm just going to go to the We Are page, which is the page that I created to sort of profile some of the creatives. So for instance, we have Kiko Romeo and just a little biography of who they are and how to connect with them. But then if you go back here, we go to featuring, which is some articles as well, which are, oh my gosh, sorry about that. Sorry. Which are just about different things that would reflect on Kenyan culture and Kenyan creatives just around the world. So for instance, Waridi Glam, which is founded by a Kenyan British designer, and about her work and how to connect with her and that kind of thing. So going back to the presentation, I looked at the British Fashion Council initiatives, and I thought that definitely if more growth and space were to continue, then definitely this could be a way for potentially the British Fashion Council to create a space for not only Kenyans, but I imagine African creatives to create work coming out of Africa and really demonstrate what we can do. And this would obviously potentially hopefully be with Kenya Created. So yeah, that's everything I have. Any thoughts and questions?
Cool, thank you very much. So we got another sort of virtual round of applause. I always find like Zoom applause is a little bit sort of bloodless and like neutral, and I think we've had 4 really amazing presentations. I think what we should do, I think we should all turn our mics on and see if we can actually have like a real round of applause that will kind of scramble Zoom servers or something like that. So kind of give them a round of applause. Right, thank you. It feels a bit more like a proper round of applause, worthy of your hard labours and the excellent quality of those presentations. So we've got about 20 minutes for questions and responses from the audience, who I'm sure have lots of really interesting things to say about your presentation. So can I get a first question from someone? Well, while you're thinking about that, oh, so Rihanna, please.
And Anne as well. I think I also have a question for Petronella. And my question was about, well, you know, we've been hearing a lot about cultural appropriation over the last few years, and nevertheless, and still kind of, you know, these case studies happen all the time. So I was wondering whether you could reflect whether there's anything that you see as missing, I suppose, maybe in design education and fashion design education, that kind of leads to these sorts of unfortunate examples, or what do you think might be, so, you know, in terms of, you know, design methodologies, in terms of design practice, what needs to be implemented to create a more aware way of approaching these issues?
I think definitely the fact that I had actually mentioned this after I had done my presentation, because I had an amazing supervisor, Lauren, and I had told her that if, I guess, specifically for people of color who aren't from the UK, had access to learning more about fashion within their specific continents or countries, then that would be very sort of impactful, because I felt like throughout my degree, as much as it was very culturally diverse, it was to a certain extent, and I felt like it was definitely on a European-centric like view. And so if there is any possibility of that changing with maybe a POC like lecturer who maybe specializes in like African fashion or Asian fashion and that kind of thing, I think that is definitely the best start, because it impacts the next generation of creatives. And then we can work from there.
Thank you very much.
Oh, Anne, I believe you have a question.
Hi, yes, fantastic presentations from everyone. And my questions for Petronella. First of all, really, really interesting that you kind of framed what you were doing against the slides of of Kenya and the British brutality and colonialism, you know, with the Mau Mau and everything in the concentration camps. And I just wondered if that you're aware of any dialogue that had happened with the fashion houses. I think, is it Coco Tazia that were kind of appropriating with the collars and so on, whether you're aware of any dialogues with them that had kind of made those connections to theft and colonialism?
With Kokon Tazai, I'm not necessarily sure. I think when I read any sort of interviews or articles after they had their showing at London Fashion Week, they were talking about the fact that they were very inspired by sort of tribal African wear, and that's where they sort of gathered it from, which I felt was very generic and also very offensive, considering that just in Kenya alone, we have 43 different tribes. But with Louis Vuitton at the time, I know that Kim Jones was the creative director of the men's division, and he had said that he had spent some time in Kenya, and so he wanted the collection to be a reflection of that, which to a certain extent I do appreciate. But I think in order for it to be a full reflection of the Maasai tribe, then he could have definitely collaborated with Maasai craftsmen from back home, and I think that would have been a lot more impactful, because just in the way that also the models were wearing the clothing, it's not the way that the Maasai would drape themselves. So I think just those little small details, had he actually collaborated with some of the Maasai from Kenya, then it would have been a lot better.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And I think you said you also have a question for Chloe. So I know Lily's got a question.
Yeah,
as well.
I didn't want to take up too much time, but Chloe, thank you, brilliant, amazing presentation, and I just wondered, you know, I've thought about your work quite a lot, and just really thinking about the things that seem to bring something that seems to me to bring the different strands together is that idea of thinking into existence and being outside of this world, and some kind of connection with science fiction. And I mean, that is a kind of, you know, I know that you know about Afrofuturism and so on. And is there anything in particular that you've picked up on to do with Black women using, or women of color using science fiction? Just wondered if you can.
I feel like in general, it's very hard to understand people. Like, I feel like the world likes to generalize groups, and it's not just Black women, like everyone gets generalized into a category, but just as individuals, we'll never understand each other thoroughly. So I think it's important that we at least make the effort to at least understand ourselves. So that's something that I learned.
Thank you. Cheers. Thank you.
Yeah.
Lily.
Yes, thank you all. That was so great. I really learned a lot and enjoyed all of your presentations. I have a question just for Alecsi. I was interested. I don't know much about K-pop, but I was really interested in what you were talking about with the aspect of sort of soft masculinity and sorry, you said it was skinship. I think was what it was. Is that right? Skinship?
Yeah, skinship. Yes.
And I thought that was really fascinating in terms of there seemed to be this sort of fine line. You know, you're talking about kind of anti-toxic masculinity and this androgyny, but, you know, looking at aspects of queerness, whether or not, you know, kind of come together in this cultural context, in this, you know, so there seems to be this, you know, sort of connecting these young men, you know, who are very overtly affectionate with one another to a maternal relationship. It's almost sort of, it almost feels as if there's sort of like anything but an actual homosexual relationship. You know, I mean, that was the impression I got. I don't know if I'm totally off, but I wondered if you could speak more to that idea, sort of these like invisible boundaries, maybe, where certain things are kind of being pushed and others are maybe not as much. I just wonder what you think.
So with that, I think because South Korea it's kind of ironic actually, because of like how they're very androgynous and very effeminate. It's because like South Korea is a heteronormative country, so, and that means like they think that heterosexual is the default kind of sexual orientation, and like I guess because it's taboo to talk about the homosexuality, they kind of portray that through gender performance. And I guess that's the difference with Western culture, because in Western culture it's all about toxic masculinity, and like I think every person has a masculine and feminine side to them, but Western culture is just afraid to kind of show that, whereas in Eastern culture they embrace it, but at the same time it's also taboo to talk about it. So, and in terms of K-pop, because they don't want to have that kind of, it's taboo, right? So they don't want to like have to expose their personal life if ever they are you know, homosexual, but instead they will just kind of show that through gender performativity to kind of please fans who fantasize about that. But yeah, it's quite ironic for them to be very effeminate, but then at the same time they don't speak about their sexual orientation that much. They're very private with their lives. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, that's great. I just thought that was an interesting tension, and that exactly what you've said, that it's such an interesting symptom of a heterosexist culture to have that, you know what I mean? That sort of or of gender, you know, which is very paradoxical in a way, but also
right. And
so
like,
thank you.
and no worries. And it's just like a form of fan service. Like a lot of fans, they love to fantasize about relationships between members, like shipping them together. I don't know why they do that. I guess there's a lot of crazy fans out there, but just to please fans, they will do that. And most of the time they do that in front of the camera. Yeah. And to answer your question, Luke, no, I haven't watched a Chinese drama, The Untamed, but maybe I should if you recommend it.
In terms of Lily's question, it's a very interesting one because it's based on a manhwa comic, which is kind of has an explicitly sort of homosexual boy love kind of thing, but it's very interestingly coyly kind of presented because that is illegal in mainland China to represent homosexual relationships. For some reason, they keep on going off and stroking rabbits. It's kind of like a sort of a coded sort of thing for homosexuality, essentially. So it's very sort of interesting in that sort of representation of masculinity, and if those, you know, so lots of the same kind of you know, kind of there's sort of a shared set of issues in East Asian popular culture, I think, which are kind of inflected slightly differently according to those interlinked but different traditions.
Yeah, they definitely hide their sexuality very well. Or I guess it's just such a taboo thing in Asia that everyone's just too scared to kind of talk about it. So.
Did I see your hand go up again, Lily? Did it sort of go down and then come back
up? Yeah, sorry, yeah, I wanted to ask Molly a question as well. Just thinking about, you know, I was thinking about what you were talking about with this, you know, the sort of degrees of anthropomorphism and the various ways in which you could see them functioning slightly differently. And I was thinking in relation to happy feet and the kind of aspect of environmentalism and issues around that, and thinking about how anthropomorphism, you know, the ethics of anthropomorphism in general, in terms of, you know, not necessarily in terms of thinking about it as a symbol of a human experience, but as a representation of an actual life form, an actual animal that has an existence outside of humanity, that, you know, that is distinct. And I was thinking about there was that great, I'm going to forget the name of the artist now, but they did that, I'm going to forget the name of it, but they essentially reanimated the Jungle Book, taking out all anthropomorphized aspects of the film, so that it was just, you know, an hour and a half of the panther and the tiger kind of just being panthers and tigers. It was, you know, and it was presented in festivals and in galleries. And, you know, and I think there's a kind of interesting question. I mean, what you're talking about is sort of the messages and symbols and representation of human concerns. But I was wondered if you also thought about that element of anthropomorphism as being itself kind of unfair or unethical towards animals themselves.
I mean, I didn't really research into that area for the dissertation, but I think it's a very interesting idea, because obviously, as much of it's interesting, like within Happy Feet, that we can see the view from the animal's side in that sense, but equally, I guess it can be somewhat biased, because obviously humans are making what they perceive the penguins feel, right? So they're like, oh, we could just say, oh, the penguins don't really care that we're stealing all their food. They like it, really. They eat too much fish. Anyway, but then equally, you know, it's kind of uncruel in a way that we do give this fake sense of how they feel. Whereas, I mean, we'll never truly understand, obviously, how the penguins feel or how anything feels. But obviously, I think there is an element there that you're right, that it can be uncruel, that if you get what I mean, that I think, yeah, I don't know where I'm going with that, but sorry. But yeah, I think there's definitely that element that it can be biased and uncruel in some senses, because obviously we're biased and there's only so much that we can represent. And obviously that can be persuaded. You know, if you worried that kids are like, oh, the poor little fluffy bunnies, and you're like, oh no, really? Let's make a fake film about how a bunny's treated when actually it's not treated that way at all. It can give a fake sense of something, you know, or bees, we really like them, it's not that bad really, but actually we treat them quite horribly. Like, you know, like chickens in an overcrowded farm, for example, if you only portray representations of happy chickens loving their life on a field, it doesn't really represent what's really happening. Even if you do show them in an overcrowded coop, you can just make them look like they're happy and enjoying it, but really they're probably not. So it's really going to portray a fake sense to children and even adults that don't really know much about it. So yeah, I think you're right.
But it's an interesting tension that you're talking about. Sorry, can you, my connection's unstable. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. So just about the nature of children's media, right? And how much kind of truth do we give? You know, I mean, that's a very essential question I think you're touching on there. And, you know, the work I was talking about with the Jungle Book is not for, you know, it's not aimed at children. it's an art piece, you know, it's a reflection upon that idea. But yeah, it's interesting. I just wondered if you had kind of considered that extreme of the debate, you know, of like, well, we should anthropomorphize because it's wrong, you know, that kind of idea.
I think there's always a line between wrong and right, depending on who uses it and how someone utilizes it. You know, someone can utilize it in a really nice way, but then someone can be really horrible. So I don't think it's like a clear black and white, oh, you shouldn't use it, you should. It really, again, with the same as anthropomorphism, there's no right way to use it. There's no right person who should use it. Obviously, you want to use it for good necessarily, but you can't always say which person's going to use it.
Of course, yeah. Thank you, Molly.
No problem.
A question from Alberto, and we also have a question from Rihanna. Alberto, go ahead.
Yes. Can you hear me, first of all? Oh, great. Okay. Well, first of all, I wanted to praise everyone because it's been a really wonderful set of presentation from all of you. In fact, as the more the presentation were accumulating, and the more I became first confused about what question I wanted to ask, and then I realized that perhaps there is a thread that we can find in some of the things you presented. And it's really interesting. First of all, I'm here, and off screen there is my daughter, who's 18, is a total K-pop fan, so she's just doesn't want to be seen, but she's definitely into the conversation. So thanks, Alexis, for bringing that in. So the part that I wanted to, the kind of the things I wanted to put in the middle is structural issues, really. Is, you know, you talked about your work, you talked about particular example, we talked about particular moments of specific moments of representations and issues with appropriation, cultural appropriations, or cultural shifts and all the rest. And of course, as good researchers, you go to the specific because that's what we teach you to do. That's what we say is just produces good research. But then sometimes we also find ourselves that the more we go into the specific, the more we realize that massive structural issues appear. And those are the ones that perhaps are the most difficult to tackle in research, and they stretch out into social justice issues, activism, and all other forms of unmaking or attempt to unmake. And I see this, for instance, Petronella, I see it in when you brought in the amazing sort of forms of cultural exploitations. You might call it appropriation if you want to be nice, but there are certain edges in which they are basically fledged appropriation. And then you mentioned the British Council. And for instance, there's something that I wonder whether is structurally there in the fashion industry, which doesn't really do that job very well. And I have one example, for instance, that I always bring up in some lectures, when Prada, for instance, as late as 2016, 2017, right in the middle of Black Lives Matter coming through and all of that, come up with a blackface jumper, right? And then in the same year, they actually adopt Theaster Gates and Ava DuVernay as their brand ambassador for diversity. And you're thinking, how can you be more literally hypocritical, two-faced, fake, signaling wokeness, but in fact signaling the complete opposite? So how do we get to this structural issues, which is obviously, it's big, right? There is something there that is, we might call it for its name. Maybe we should, but I'm more interested in what you think.
So it's funny that you brought that up because So like, as I mentioned, I'm like a third culture kid. I've lived in 7 different countries because of my mom's job. She is the ambassador to Kenya, funny enough. Well, not here, but yeah. And a lot of my research was formulated by looking through her archives, funny enough, through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, because a lot of the stuff on colonialism is not public because they did a lot of messed up things and they kind of want to keep it buried. And she found it quite like ironic that the British Council had set up this fashion sector in which they wanted to, you know, encourage these fashion creatives when some of them are ancestors of people that they were killing for being their tribe. And I think that the issue with that is that it's not, as much as I said that like their work was nice, the work of Creative DNA is very nice and everything, it's always going to have a tie to a white dominated space. And instead, I think the way to change that is to applaud the spaces that are African, that are Black, that are Asian instead, and build those up instead of just trying to put like a Black person in a white space and say, hey, actually we do care about race, or we do care about these people. Look, we have an Asian person here, we have a Black person here. But it's not because I don't think people of color are not establishing things for themselves. They are. It's just that we're not taking note of that. And if there is a way that I guess like magazines, people can just take note of that and really create the presence that they deserve, I think that that could change a lot.
Cool. So I've got 2 last questions. So I've got one from Elisabetta and one from Rihanna. We're going to slightly go over our time, but I think we're eating into lunchtime. And for me, the trade-off of losing 5 to 10 minutes of lunch and, you know, continuing this really fascinating discussion is well worth it. So Elisabetta, would you like to ask your question first? We're a student-centered university, so you get to talk first.
Thanks. Okay, so first of all, thank you so much to everyone for the presentations. I had to drop in and out because I was also interested in the other panel, so I was doing both. But anyway, thank you so much. Molly, I've got a question. Actually, it's a consideration / question / let's talk about this. And it's about anthropomorphization. I'm totally against it, but I'm vegan, so I think I have a prejudice. But at the same time, I think I've also had an epiphany while you were talking about it. The reason why I'm against it is because I think it's speciesism, basically. To anthropomorphize everything is speciesist, and it's to put ourselves on the top of the scale and go, right, I'm going to adapt all you guys to me. And that's why I'm against it. But at the same time, I think it's limiting. And it's a need for control. I think the reason why we anthropomorphize most of the times, we say to ourselves that is to understand things better. But maybe it's because we are too stuck into our anthropomorphized way of thinking that we have to be in control of the thinking process, of the rationalized process. And therefore, the only way for us to be in control of that is to make everything fit with us. And the biggest example I have is exactly animation, and it's 3D CGI animation, which for me is unbelievable that we have all these amazing, powerful machines and codes and algorithms, and we can create anything, and all we do is copy and make everything hyper realistic rather than making it something we can't imagine. And I think it's down to control. What do you think?
I think you bring up a really interesting point that, like, obviously, as humans, you know, we try and find faces in every, you know, cars, doorways, everyone finds faces. And obviously, I think you know, your point of that we're trying to understand it by making it like us, and that technically puts us, you know, obviously kind of essentially saying that we're the highest, most intellectual thing, so therefore everything should become like us for us to understand it. I think that's a really interesting point, and I think you have a, like I said, a point that obviously we're turning everything to like us to understand it. And I think you said something about like how it's basically to control it, and I think, yeah, it's a really interesting view, because as much as we like I said earlier to Lily, like we can put our views on it, and that's very constricting. And you know, we're making humanized animals, but we could make completely other things, as you said, you know. I mean, obviously humanized animals, but then in like the new Lion King, we made them more animalistic. We don't necessarily need to have the words, but it's the only way that we can really understand something. So I hope I'm making sense there, but I think you bring up an interesting idea that it really, we are we're a bit kind of think a bit highly of ourselves to make it all like us rather than accepting them for the way they are.
We're stuck into ourselves, kind of thing.
Yeah, but I think that's just people in general, isn't it? I don't think it's ever going to change, sadly, but I think that's the only way we can really truly understand something, is to make it like us and then relate it, you know. That's why we see faces and everything, because we're constantly trying to look for something that we relate to. So the only way we can relate to it is, oh, let's give it emotions and talk like us. So yeah.
Can I add one more thing for Molly? Like, because you had just mentioned The Lion King, and when I watched it, like, of course, I loved the Lion King when I was younger, but when I watched it as an adult, because it's apparently like placed or inspired by like the Maasai Mara in Kenya, and I just thought it was really interesting because it definitely is just humans behind an animal and not necessarily like a reflection of the animalistic nature of the animals if you were to actually go to places like Masai Mara or the Serengeti. So I just found that really interesting that you brought it up, and I liked your presentation a lot. So.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I mean, obviously it's kind of known that Lion King is really based off Shakespeare, Hamlet, like completely. But I always find it amusing when watching Lion King, you know, like that scene where they're all there and they're like raising the little baby, and you're like, that wouldn't happen because you'd all be trying to eat each other. That's not how it would work, you know. Little peaceful Giselles with lions and you're all friends with it. No, that wouldn't happen. You wouldn't see gazelles just freely walking up to a lion happily. So I always find it a little amusing.
Territory, and they don't cross each other.
Exactly, because why would you? You're completely different animals. You're predator and prey. Like you're not all happy friends. You make it out, and like obviously, you know, lions are the ruler of the kingdom, but there isn't like some king of the. So I do find it quite amusing sometimes when you look at it from like a sheer animal perspective. You're like, no, that wouldn't happen, but okay, carry on.
Oh, Rihanna.
Yeah, I think this relates to all of these questions that actually I had. Yeah, a question for Molly as well, and I was wondering. Obviously, you talked about Happy Feet and the other. I can't.
Zootopia.
But they're both, so they're both sort of Western, I suppose, animated films. So I was wondering whether this kind of the hierarchical relationship in terms of anthropomorphism and what Elizabeth was asking in terms of kind of species hierarchies, etc. Is that, do you think that in other kind of contexts, geographies, these approaches are the same? You know, there's often very, you know, this very human perspective you know, instilled on top of kind of animals, or is it, or not? Maybe there are more kind of animal-centric narratives in other cultural contexts.
I mean, obviously, I didn't really research into many other cultures within anthropomorphism. I mainly just picked some of the movies I really enjoyed, you know, to keep my interest peaked. I love all three of the movies that I picked. But I think potentially with other cultures, I mean, obviously, take the Egyptians, for example, they highly thought of cats as quite high, you know, above them in some cases. So perhaps if you had a movie that was anthropomorphized representing that, I think you'd almost have, you could have the representation of animals being above humans within that. Obviously, as Elizabeth said, you know, it's still us turning them into animals. So it's still somewhat of a hierarchy there. But I think perhaps within other cultures, depending on their traditions and the way they view things, it could change slightly, you know. And I think I do like the idea of not like having only animals in the film, not in the same way that Zootopia is only animals, but kind of having something that's more naturally based, you know, kind of more like what Lily was talking about with the Jungle Book, kind of just showing animals and the way that they are, even if you give them voices and stuff like that. But it'd be nice to see some more natural related stuff as well, I think, in contrast to the highly anthropomorphized stuff as well.
Can I just add to that, going back to what Alberto was saying about the structures and the sort of systems of this, and that what we're talking about, particularly with CG animation, is a very Western, you know, narrative story, right? Where you know, people don't watch things that aren't interesting to them, that aren't catered to their desires, and that, you know, that, I mean, we spend, you know, billions of dollars every year trying to fascinate people and get their attention, and so, you know, you're not, you know, that's a major factor in why we present these images to ourselves and why we keep perpetually doing this, you know, giving it to our children to learn to think in these ways, is because of effectively, you know, the financial aspects of this. So I think, you know, whether or not we would want to, you know, and some artists, some 3D animation artists are exploring these other non-anthropomorphized types of work, but it certainly isn't the kind of stuff you see in the multiplex, right? So, you know, I mean, this is a major part of you know, of understanding where exhibition and industry factors in to these issues.
And I think kind of going like off of that and what Alberto said as well, is with every presentation that we've seen today, I think kind of the common theme is really that it's just education wise, like with, you know, the fashion and the Asian culture and stuff like that, everything, and Black culture, as Chloe said as well, it's all kind of based around everything just needs to be more educated, you know, educated about Black culture, educated about tribes, educated about Asian you know, the masculinity and stuff like that, everything, in even anthropomorphism. If we just embrace animals and other cultures as well, it won't become as westernized as well. And I think that's kind of a reoccurring theme with everything. Everyone just needs to learn more about the cultures. Then, you know, you can represent cultures within anthropomorphism, within fashion, within, and just embrace that a lot more, I think, really.
Cool. I think that's a really nice way to finish the session. So I know there might be some more questions that people have, which I think is kind of a testament to how rich and interesting this kind of session's been. But we're already 12 minutes past our time. So unfortunately, I think I really should bring the session to a close. So one last time, I think we should give each other a round of applause, not me, but the rest of them, a round of applause.
Well done, everybody.
For papers and for a really rich and fascinating discussion. I mean, what I will do, I'll leave this room kind of open, I guess. I'll stop recording, but I'll leave the room open. So if people want to kind of hang out and chew the fat during their lunchtime, you're absolutely free to, I guess. This would be the sort of the bit in the conference where people are going off and, you know, eating sandwiches together and talking about their papers. So feel free to use that room to do so. Or if you need to stagger off and, you know, sort of have a lie down, then you're free to do that as well. So thank you very much, everyone.